Welcome to the Inside Out podcast. This is your fearless host, Joe. It's a podcast that's specifically designed to help you see, think, and create from the inside out. And who better than Bill Sangalli to help me really do, to help me work through this stuff? Because the first podcast we did was so powerful, and we thought, we had some unfinished business. We had some stuff that we wanted to talk through. So I thought, Bill, let's get on this thing again and start to have this conversation, because I got some feedback from the last podcast, and people just loved you and loved the way you think. And so how you doing?
It's funny, Conversations,
Yeah.
I always find are like that, though.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the best conversation is after, when in my head, like when I hit the pillow and I keep thinking about stuff, right? And then I keep, oh man, and then I start going all these different places that the conversation spurred onto me. So it goes on and on in my head. You know what I mean? It doesn't end when we stop.
It's
So
true.
we're thinking a lot about some of the stuff we talked about.
Yeah.
And just kind of elaborating on that and just kind of digging deep in there. Because I love this idea of inside out. Like, that's for me, it's always getting to the thing behind the thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm always interested. I'm always
Yeah.
interested in what I call the DNA of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Not the surface,
Yeah.
or not even the layers, but the real beginning point. And usually that is just something that's very simple.
Yeah.
And then it becomes complex as it layers on, So I'm always, that's where my mind always goes. I'm always sort of digging for what's behind stuff. What is the kernel? What is the root of this that really unlocks all this complexity,
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I enjoy our conversations, is that you have this ability to see the thing behind the thing. And and in this moment of time, we need that type of vantage point on especially some really important issues.
Yeah.
And I know we discussed the power and a culture of polarization.
Yeah.
And we felt that,
Yeah.
we didn't give it enough attention.
There's so much more to mine there. And that's what I love about this kind of longer form conversation. We can really take our time and just dig. It's not so much that I see it. It's more that I just go digging,
Mm-hmm.
then I want to dig deeper and deeper and deeper. And the richness often is several layers below the surface. It takes a while to get to the good stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I love having the time to just get in and start working our way down the layers until we get to the gold.
The gold,
Hit the oil,
I
and you
love
don't know
it.
when it's going to come, right?
No.
Sometimes it comes quick. Sometimes it's like takes a while to get there, but when
Yeah.
you get it, and just
It's
when
so
you have
powerful.
that aha, and you go, oh, yes, right, that moment where you go, oh, this connects, this clicks now, and if I figure, like, if you could understand something at its most, or you can go as far down into the DNA of something, then you kind of catch everything above it, right? It's like the river, right? You can enter the river at any point in the river. But if you go to the mouth of the river, you get the whole river, right? Because all the water will, right? If you go in halfway through the river, you get the river.
Yeah.
But it's just from there downstream, right? But if you go to the very mouth of it, you really are capturing the entire river.
Yeah, and I love the source of, whether it's words or ideas, where they come from. And I think often, because we live in a culture where it's very difficult to take time and to dissect and to dig, we often are talking at a surface level. And I think the purpose of this podcast, and why you and I are having this conversation, is to help people dig.
Yeah, and the fun part of it is, like, we never get to the real bottom, because it's like, that's what I love even with science, right? I'm not a scientist. I don't know a lot about science, but even the idea that, the micro world, like they go into, they invent microscopes, and then they can see bacteria, and they can see cells, and and then eventually they get to DNA, and then there's like stuff that's even smaller than that, right? And smaller yet, and the same with the macro world, right? The universe, right? They never find the end of it, right? There's another galaxy and another solar system or whatever. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not using the right words, but the idea that, like, just when we think we've entered the biggest room, there's a door in the corner, and you open that door and there's an even bigger room, or smaller, depending on which direction you're going, right? So it's like a never ending, but that's part of the fun of it, right? Because there's always more. There's always a deeper place.
And I think that's the purpose of life, though. And the pursuit, or is this idea that, you if we found what we're looking for eventually, let's just say, you found the answer, then at that point, well, you're, I guess, God.
Well, here's
You're
the thing.
all-knowing?
To me, I always love the paradox, right? Like, we can find some things, right? Because here's the thing. Because you and I,
Yes,
we've
had this
come from
conversation.
sort of a fairly traditional sort of church kind of background, right? And that culture tends to bank on certainty, really loves certainty, and really, the Bible is certain and the literal and blah, blah, blah. And then the other extreme is sort of this existential soup of like, we can't know anything. We can't even know that we even exist. And this crazy, like, give me a gun, like either one, like
Yeah.
both of them. I don't like either of those
Both
polarities.
extremes, yeah.
I like the idea that we can know certain things, but we can't know absolutely everything because there's so much to know. So we never run out of things to know, but we can, like even in life, like we master certain areas more than others, right?
Yes, of course.
Certain people spend their whole life mastering an area and they know it really well, and they literally become masters at that area, right? So they do know that. So it's not an all or nothing. Like you can't know anything, or you can't have any certainty. You can have some certainty, but it's only a relative certainty, and it's only a piece of certainty in this vast, endless ocean of more and possibility and endless. So that's why we can never get too rigid with our
That's
certainty.
correct.
But on the other hand, we can also, like, like even physically, like, I mean, again, I'm not a scientist, but even reading on stuff, like they still don't really understand how gravity works, but it's pretty certain. Like it works, like we rely on it it's pretty consistent. We're pretty certain about both its existence and how it functions, but we're not really sure we understand it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's
so
true.
it's both. It's not like there's no certainty and or that there's absolute certainty. It's neither of those. There's relative certainty, and we can keep digging for more,
Yeah.
So it's fun. It's like collecting stuff. You get more. You just get another piece of. Anyways, like for me, that what I wanted to bring up in that context,
exactly.
just having brought that up, because you were a pastor, right? And so I know a lot of your audience comes from a church background, and probably a good part of your audience doesn't come from a church background, right? So one of the things that I find fascinating that's been a sort of a pursuit of mine has been to looking at what I learned, in my childhood and in my youth as Bible stories, and coming out of, really stripping the religion out of them, really, because I've really not found that I relate very well with the religious culture, but I found an invaluable wealth of knowledge and wisdom in the Bible. But I don't like the whole religious aspect of it, and I feel like there's been a conflation of the Bible as being a religious book, but it's not. It's the human book. It's for all of us. So even people who don't believe in God there's some lessons there for us as humans.
course.
And I think now with the times we're living in, I've just been seeing over and over, how relevant the very first story of the Bible is to the times that we're going through right now. This whole season of pandemic. And again, just to identify your audience, because this might be seen several years from now. We're in 2020 right now. It's September 2020. Can you believe it?
Wow.
And it's been a whopper of a year by anybody's standard. Nobody had predicted all of the stuff that would happen this year. It's just
Not
been
a
crazy.
chance.
And the world is really, at a huge
Crossroads.
There's stuff happening that's never happened in the history of the world. And we're dealing with newer and newer challenges that have never come up. And one of them is, the very, very, very deep polarization that's going on, in politically, we're still, we don't know. It's September. So in less than a month from now, and we're not going to get political because I don't know enough about politics, but Donald Trump may or may not get a second term. That's a huge deal. There's a lot going on in the U.S., a lot going on with race. There's been some very significant sparks that have really brought that issue, the issue of systemic racism, really to the forefront. And we talked about this last time. One of the symbols of this year is breathing.
Yeah.
So, and then we've got this pandemic. That's the other thing, the coronavirus, which is a respiratory illness, and it literally takes your breath away and literally will kill you by not being able to breathe, ultimately, and to put it simply in non-medical terms. So this whole idea of breath, we talked about this last time, right? So, and then George Floyd, who was a gentleman who was killed by the police a few months ago, his final words, or almost his final words for sure, were, "I can't breathe." And that became this huge rallying cry. He became a symbol for this deep-seated, racial injustice that really goes back hundreds and hundreds of years and is still very much an issue. So this idea of breathing, right? So I've been thinking about all that in the context of the Genesis story, the first major story in the Bible, Adam and Eve, that whole story, right? And if you strip away all the religious aspect of it, it's like so informative about what we're dealing with today in 2020. Like, it's really crazy. So you're just looking at me.
I'm excited. I want you because I mean, you're here because I think you have a really important insight to what's happening. I always think of it in the context of there are some who are prophetic voices, and people always think of the prophetic as being foretelling. I think of prophetic in a completely different context, in the sense that it's those individuals who give us insight to what's happening and give us language. Because often, unless you have knowledge and understanding, you don't really clearly come into an awareness of. And so I think you have this ability to really bring aspects of scripture into, it's almost like you unearth it.
So I want to talk really quickly, because I don't want to lose a percentage of the audience who doesn't believe in the Bible or God, who doesn't care for it. Because I'm good with that. I'm not a Bible peddler. No. I don't feel like I want to convince people.
Bible peddler. I like that. You peddle the Bible.
Pusher, a dealer. That's the part of actually, the religious aspect that I don't like. I don't like that. So I totally value and respect. In fact, some of my favorite thinkers are full-on atheists. Even though I'm a believer in God, I don't hold that as something that I need to defend or convince. I'm not interested in that.
Gotcha.
So when I talk about the Bible stories, like the stuff that we can mine out of it for this day and age, for what's going on right now in 2020, is valuable, whether or not you believe the Bible to be anything more than a bunch of fables. Right? That's okay, because it still works.
Correct.
Right? Because it's like the power of story. I mean, that's why movies and books and fiction, they're some of our most treasured cultural ways of dealing, even like Star Trek and Star Wars. It's all fantasy. It doesn't exist. Luke Skywalker isn't real. Yoda isn't real, but I can learn a lot of wisdom from Yoda.
Of course.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's these symbols, right? The symbols like Darth Vader, the symbol of oppression and this sort of totalitarian, corrupt power. So we're used to that kind of thing. So just looking at the Bible from that lens. So if you're not a Bible person, you're not a believer in anything supernatural, you're pure natural, that's okay.
Yeah.
This conversation will still work.
Yeah, you can still enter into this conversation.
Right, and if you are, that's fine too, because either way it works for me, right?
Gotcha.
So this idea, so you have this story at the beginning, and the sort of the religious kind of view of that story is kind of, here's, God creates these two, first, Adam and then Eve, and then they are told that there's a rule, and that the rule is that they're not to eat of this one tree, and everybody knows this story. I mean, it's really rooted in literally it's Genesis, it's the beginnings. That's why I find this story endlessly fascinating, because it's so much about our beginnings as a human race. Whether it's literal or not, it doesn't matter. It's like the Star Wars thing. It doesn't matter. What matters is what the story is trying to tell us, right? And so that's kind of the traditional view, and then they disobey God, and God is angry, and He's going to punish them, and blah blah blah. That is like I don't like that whole way of seeing it. I see something quite different in it. I see this very interesting understanding of what it is that trips us up as human beings. It's a cautionary tale, right? And so the tree that they're not supposed to eat of is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Right? So what is that? The knowledge of good and evil. It's the idea of this making moral judgments on ourselves, on each other. This idea of polarization. It's exactly what's happening right now. It's like you see it all the time now. It's like, you're either good or you're evil. like, oh, you're whatever, you support that. You're there's this
The sides.
but like never as intense that I remember as now.
Yeah, it's intensified, definitely.
There's the Republican, Democrat, and there's, whatever it is, conservative, progressive, what was the opposite of
Liberal.
Liberal. That's it. We're in Canada. I should know that, right? Liberal, conservative. But now it's like your enemies, like, and the viciousness and it's just, it literally does sometimes take my breath away. The viciousness of the polarity now, right? And you can't have any nuance. That's part of what we talk about. Like, you can't kind of be like I just said, I could draw. Oh, I like drawing. I love drawing from the Bible on that side, but I love drawing from this side too. I find treasure across the board. Like, I don't want to be locked into one or the other. So this polarity, the good or evil, those are the only choices. This binary fixed choice. It's either good or evil, and we're morally making the choice, ourselves. We're deciding what's good and what's evil. I mean, that's the heart of racism right there, right? It's one group of people, or individuals, or a collective group of people deciding that they're better than the other group of people in one way or another. Fundamentally, go back to the very basic. We're good, you're evil or bad. We're better, you're worse. We're superior, you're inferior. That's the basis of it. So the story is that when we human beings go there, we cause ourselves all kinds of trouble. And it's happening like all around us right now. It's so pervasive.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I love it because it's as you're speaking this, I was thinking of the movie with I don't know why I was thinking about this, but you remember the scene, You Can't Handle the Truth.
Oh, yeah. Jack
Nicholson to Tom Cruise. I don't remember who he was at the time, the character. He was a military guy.
Yeah. A Few Good Men.
A Few Good Men. That's a great, but that's the point that you're making here, is just that ability, the knowledge of good and evil. We can't handle it. And when we eat of that fruit, it turns us apart.
Yeah, and again, when you don't go literal, what is eating? Eating is consuming, it's ingesting, right? So we were talking about this earlier, you and I, before we started recording. Right now, we are, as a generation, we're ingesting knowledge and messages about that feed this polarity like never before. We're ingesting it all the time.
Social media.
Right? Social media, the whole way. We are constantly feeding, ingesting on, and we know, there's a movie just came out on Netflix, watched it last night. It's what's it called? The Social Dilemma. And it's all these young, well, they're young, still young, but the guys who worked, not just male, I mean guys as in male and female, but people who worked at the big companies like Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Google, all these companies, and they all had quite high up roles in founding these companies. Some of them are engineers, some of them were VPs of marketing or whatever, and they all had a hand in creating what is now social media. And it's a really terrifying movie because this isn't like conspiracy theory stuff where it's a bunch of people from the outside sort of, suggesting that maybe these are people from the inside who were there and who actually created
this stuff,
or were a part of creating this stuff, telling you what's baked into this. And one of the things that's baked into it, among a lot of other things, a great movie worth seeing, definitely worth seeing, it's on Netflix, is that it's actually designed to manipulate our thinking and to actually train us to think and behave in very subtle incremental ways. And so when you multiply that out to 2 billion people, like one of the really heavy lines in the movie is one of the guys says, like, he realized, he was working at Google, and he said he realized that this handful of predominantly white male young engineers, and it's not like a conspiracy, it's not like they were sitting there with Dr. Evil going, we're going to take over the world. It was just kind of the way it evolved, right? But this very small handful of now are literally affecting how billions of people think and perceive and act. That's really frightening, right? And so part of what is baked into social media is this is arousing moral outrage, right? So it's so feeding the polarization now, right? It's we're feeding off the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We're feeding off this tree that keeps telling us those people are evil, this is good, that cause is good, this cause is evil. Like, it's just this, and so we're like the ugliness of the discourse now.
And this is the thing, though. I understand how these platforms evolve, in that the ultimate goal, and you shared this with me, that one of the guys that was on this program was in charge of monetization.
Yeah.
And so the challenge for these guys was that they created these platforms in which they disseminated information for free, whether it's Google or Facebook. Their whole business model is to invite millions of people to access their platforms. But then at some point they had to make money doing this, and this is where they had to run ads. And so what they understood very quickly was that their business was data collection. And so when I think about it, like in an advertising sense, for example, whether it's Facebook, Google, or any of these guys, what they're doing is they are literally making sure that they're tracking people's behavior. It's no longer like before, you marketed out to a number. You don't really know the person. It was a demographic, or maybe you had psychographic targeting, which is more interest-based.
Yeah.
So you didn't really know the person, though. You didn't really know whether they liked something. But this is where the sophistication has gotten with the algorithms, is that they now have the ability to track our behaviors across all the media platforms.
Right. But that's only the starting point.
Yes.
It actually gets way worse than that. And now the behaviors that are tracked, the profile, so they dramatize in the movie that this avatar of who we are based on our behavior online is so sophisticated and so it's massive in the amount of data points.
Yeah, correct.
That now then the next step is they use the information about us to manipulate us,
to change us,
literally to change our behavior.
Totally.
So if it was just tracking and collecting, that would be fairly benign, and that's what we've kind of thought. Well, we know that, right? We know that they're trafficking in some data about us. That doesn't seem that threatening, but now when you see them saying now they're using that data to manipulate our behavior and the way we think and the way we feel and our emotions at levels that are deeply psychological. And they likened it to like magicians who learn and the psychology of the mind and the eye, and they can trick you. And so they can do these illusions that appear that are mind-boggling. Like, how do you do that, right? Because they've learned how to trick the mind. Any good magician will tell you that. It's not supernatural. It's literally understanding our psychology and then using it in ways that will fool us. Okay, so now that's fine for entertainment.
Yeah.
That's fine when you go see Penn and Teller.
Yes.
But when you're now having that level, and they say like they engineer this thing to now modify our behavior, modify the way we think, and that's happening across the world to billions of people. It's very frightening. Right. And so part of what they're doing is really inciting this moral outrage and triggering this, what I was talking about earlier, this idea that the self-righteousness.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
Ways,
that, self-righteousness to me is one of the most ugly things in the world, because it's the same thing. It's the knowledge of tree of good and evil. It's the sense that I'm morally superior to you in one way because I do this, because I wear a mask, or because I shop at this kind of store, because I'm environmentally or because I believe in God and you don't, and then of course it gets really gross when it gets racial, because I'm white, whatever version of whatever I then credential myself with as being superior to you in some way. This is what we're talking about. So this Genesis story right from the beginning says that will kill us as a society, as individuals. It'll kill us, but as a society, because the next thing that produces. So in the story, God says to Adam and Eve, He says, "The day you eat of that tree, the day you consume, you ingest and you take on this mindset, because knowledge is of the mind, right? This mindset of looking at things through a morality lens. That's where, to me, religion has gotten way off the track, because most people's conception of religion is that religion is morality based. It's about right and wrong, right? And actually, that's the very thing that from the very beginning God warns against. Is no. You don't want to get into that business of ingesting and taking on the knowledge, so taking on the mindset where you see the world and you see other people and you see yourself and you see God through this lens of judging whether it's good or evil, right? Or fill in the blank. There's a sense that is deadly. And the first thing that happens, so he says, the day you eat of it, you shall surely die. Yeah. Well, what happened that day? Did they die?
No, they didn't.
They didn't die. What happened? The very first thing that happens is shame, right?
They're
Adam
covered.
hides.
Yeah.
Right? Shame. And the next thing that happens is blame.
Yeah.
Right?
Blame the woman.
Yeah. Well, in that case, it was happened to be the woman.
Yeah, exactly.
But blame and shame.
Yeah, blame and shame.
So now, 2020, blame and shame are out of control. Right? I mean, we are shaming and blaming on a level that I've not seen in my lifetime. I mean, it's always been around.
Yeah, of course.
It's a human thing.
Yeah.
We've been eating off that tree all along.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, with the technology throwing gasoline on that fire, with the technology amplifying the ability and deliberately invoking these very primal, jealousies and suspicions and fear of one another and hypening them up, the division now, right? The level of hatred for the other side, and
it's irrational.
It's totally getting there.
And this is it, and I actually wrote an article that I never posted because I was so afraid of the the shaming and I just didn't necessarily want to deal. And this is when you're being controlled by the spirit of this age, because you're thinking about, do I really want to endure this level of, hate? Because no one can have an actual civil discourse about, they're difficult issues, definitely. They're not easy issues. Mm-hmm. However, when you immediately are thinking about the consequence of you putting anything out.
I know. So that's part of what shame does, right? So shame, the way I experience shame, and I say this with a great deal of almost embarrassment, really. Mm-hmm. But I'm an expert at shame because I have lived under shame all my life. I am very susceptible to shame. It's still a major thing in my life, and it's something I'm continually working through. And in my experience, shame does exactly that. I see it almost like the way I picture shame is like if I'm I'm living in this little castle, and shame is like this the guard dog outside the castle walls, or inside the castle walls, and I want to go out. I want to come out of my shell, and every time I try to step out, the dog lunges for me and runs me back into. So I will stay in. I'll stay quiet. I'll stay small. Don't bring your opinion out. Because shame was no. You get right back in there, you little boy. You stay quiet. Stay. It's this strong inner deterrent, like you said, like fear of rejection, fear of disapproval, fear of being misunderstood, all of that stuff, right? Yeah. Shame just kind of guards the door of your coming out and being free to be yourself, to express yourself. It says no, threatens you. It's a bully.
Yeah, it is. It is a bully.
And then blame, it's so funny, like one of the popular songs right now on TikTok is this young girl. She wrote a song, and she's not even like as far as I understand, wasn't even like a musician. Well, she is in the sense that, but she wasn't a career. Yeah, she just wrote a song like many people do. Wonderful, and she put it on TikTok. And the song is, "I'm mad at Disney," and the song is she's blaming Disney for her woes because she's disillusioned because she says, well, Disney painted this world, this idea of love for me, that when you wish upon a star, your dreams come true, or the princess, always, the princess. And she's found the world harsh and disappointing and hurtful. And so she's blaming, the song is mad at Disney.
Wow.
So she's blaming Disney
for disappointment.
And it's like, oh, like, I mean, I want to hear her say, I mean, I want to hear the pain in her heart. I'm not, I'm not shaming her for it, but it just shows like, oh, like, wow. Like, so it's just
the blame
active
game
right now, right?
Yeah,
like
the blame game.
Yeah. And that's what we do. We blame and we shame each other.
Yeah.
Right. And they're very powerful social deterrents.
Yeah.
More than deterrence. That's an understatement.
Yeah. It's sad because what it does also is, and I think of it this in the context of, social media by design is adversarial. And so what happens is that you're, whether you like it or not, you're pitted
right.
On the right side or the left side. And so what you and I are talking about, this other position, which is kind of the third way, it's not available because of that culture.
Right. That's what I mean. The good and evil. You only have two options. You either are in the good camp or the evil camp at any given moment, in any given context. That's part of the problem with this tree, right? It doesn't give you another option. It's either good or evil. It's black and white, right or wrong. It's so rigid.
Yeah.
Right. And it makes you, it forces you to squeeze you into one or the other.
And no person fits.
That's the reality.
You remember originally when you and I had discussed this podcast, and we were going to call it Complicated People.
Yeah.
And the reasons behind it is that we are complicated. Often, we label people because it's easier. If I label you as Bill, the white guy who likes to listen to, I don't know.
See, you can't peg me with music because I like to listen
to
such a different
I was thinking about
variety.
it. You were just listening to some heavy metal in the car just
before
this podcast.
I might just listen to like Broadway musical on the way home. Like that's, for me, like I love all music. So
but
that's part of it, right? Because even that's a good example. Yeah. I love heavy metal.
Correct.
I love heavy metal, but I don't only love heavy metal. That's the only thing, and every other music is garbage. No, I like all kinds of music. So I don't want to just like one kind of music. I love it, but I want to love all kinds of music.
Yeah, we're more than one thing, and I think that has been kind of, I think for both myself and you, that's been kind of a big dislike in the sense of, as soon as I'm labeled as something, immediately I'm trying to get out of that label.
Yeah,
because I recognize that if it's great, you can be very successful, because I think people play this game really well. And you see that all over YouTube and social media, in the sense that people they niche down, they pick their little group of people and they talk to that group of people over and over again. And you can build, I think, very successful businesses, and you can have great impact. I'm not necessarily saying it's a negative, but I think when we talk about life in general, we're many things at the same time.
Right. And that's the other tree in the garden.
Yes.
It's the tree of life.
Yes.
Which we'll get to that, because that's the way out, right? That's the opposite tree, right?
Yes.
But there's another layer I want to add to this now, and it's the idea, because you brought it up in terms of speaking, and it reminded me again, and we talked about this last time, the idea of breaths.
Yes.
So the breath is this symbol right now, but when you think about it, so if you believe in God in that version of the story, where what happens earlier than that is God breathes into us life, and he breathes his image into us. So if you don't believe in God, that's okay, because you believe in oxygen.
Yeah.
And oxygen, again, is a physical reality, but it's also a powerful symbol of our life, right? And so our ability to breathe is so fundamental to our existence that it's the quickest thing that will kill us by depriving ourselves of it. In other words, we can go several weeks. Some people can go a little bit beyond that without eating. We can go several days, maybe even a little bit beyond that without drinking. But you can only go a few minutes without air, without oxygen. So the symbol of so again, this idea, I can't breathe, and we're being masked right now. we're all, and you were saying you censor yourself. You know, the breath is also that which is your voice, right? Like our voice is us pushing air, right? Pushing air out. And in every way we're being muzzled with shame and blame. We're being silenced.
Yeah.
We're wearing masks, which are covering our mouth, which again is a symbol of not, you know, there's so much symbolism to this.
Yeah.
And as I said last time, I'm not down on the medical aspect of it because we're talking about the layers, right?
Yeah.
Just like a story, like a movie, again, Star Wars or whatever, there's the top level and then there's the meaning behind it.
Of course.
And so I get the you know, I'm not saying, you know, don't wear masks. I'm not a conspiracy. I was thinking about conspiracy theory the other day because that's a big thing right now.
Yeah,
I mean, it's always been, but it's and I've never been that interested in conspiracy theories because I'm too interested in like stuff that I can actually get at, even if it takes some digging. Like like conspiracy theories always leave you guessing. You're never quite sure.
You're never sure.
There's never that satisfaction of we solved the mystery.
Yeah.
It always remains in that realm of it might be. There's some indication that it could be, but we can never quite prove it. I hate that. It's so frustrating.
But that's what makes conspiracy so addictive because our minds are designed for resolution. Conspiracies are never resolved.
But here's my theory about conspiracy theories. If you have a theory about some conspiracy, in this day and age, with so much technology and so many people who talk, I mean, you know, there's always some whistleblower, there's always a leaking, there's always somebody from the inside that can't keep their mouth shut, somebody who's disgruntled, who's going to, you know, with all of that, a conspiracy theory should not remain a theory very long. It right as if it's a theory for like decades, then it's stuck in theory mode. It should be provable. You know, somebody's going to talk. Yeah. Something's going to come up. We got cameras everywhere. So as long as it's a theory, it should graduate from being a theory at some point for it to have some validity. But it remains a theory.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it all. But in some ways, I think of conspiracy theories like it's a belief system. It's a religion in a sense. Is that,
I guess, yeah.
Because it has its inherent, you know, those who follow, you know, this whole world of conspiracy, whether who killed, you know, JFK, on and on it goes. I mean, we've been on YouTube. I think you've been in that, you know, wormhole of YouTube. Once you get into those conspiracy theories, you go from one video. But at the end of the day, you end up at the same place with more questions than answers.
Yeah, that's why it doesn't appeal to me.
No,
I'm not. I don't know, but obviously it does appeal to lots of people. And I forget now why I brought that up. What were we talking about that brought that on?
I don't know, because now you took me on a rabbit trail, and I'm trying to get
conspiracy theory.
Yeah, conspiracy theory.
It was the breath thing.
The breath, yes.
Right. So the idea. Oh, that's what I was saying. So this idea was the COVID thing. Mm-hmm. So I'm not anti-mask and all that. I'm saying on a medical level, whatever. It is what it is.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, but the symbolism. I'm talking about the symbolism. Because symbols are really powerful in our culture, right?
Yeah.
Like, and things can be both a reality and a symbol, right? And they're not mutually exclusive. No. One doesn't rob away. You know, a perfect example, we talked about George Floyd. He's a human being with a lot, well, no longer a life. God forbid how a horrible thing that he got killed, but he's a person.
Yeah.
But now he's also become a symbol, a symbol of, systemic violence, particularly when it comes to like authority figures like the police and stuff, you know. So he's both. Yeah. He's a real person with a real life, and he was really killed and all that. Yeah. And he's also a symbol. Yeah. And so the mask in the same way. So I don't want people, don't start writing in or whatever that we're anti-mask or we're challenging the narrative on coronavirus. I'm not going there because there's a lot of conspiracy.
Yeah,
that's what
brought
it up. There's a lot of conspiracy around that. Yeah. Some people saying the whole thing's a hoax. Whatever. I'm not getting into that. I don't know enough. But I'm talking about what the masks symbolize, what our breath symbolizes. Our breath symbolizes our worth, like the minute we lose our breath, we lose our life. Yeah. Our breath and our life are
tied together,
are as tight as you can get.
Yeah.
So again, if you don't believe in a supernatural, you don't believe in a God, you only believe in a natural world, you believe in oxygen, you believe in breath. So our breath, in the Genesis story, our breath is the very life, and for those of us who believe that or inclined to believe that breath is God's breath into us, and it gives us and it symbolizes not only us being alive, as in, being able to walk and talk and breathe, but also our our inherent value, the image of God. And if you don't believe that, that's okay. Again, same thing. As long as you have oxygen, everything else that comes from you, going to the mouth of the river, your creativity, your value in society, your contribution, whatever you bring to this world that's uniquely you, is all predicated on you being able to breathe. Right?
Yeah.
And oxygen is also a great picture of this, another, which is often, conflated with only being a Bible term. But I think, again, to me, I want to take it out of that little box. I mean, it's great, but it's so much more than that, which is this idea of grace.
Yeah, grace. Yeah.
Which is this idea of like oxygen. Like we all breathe the same oxygen, right? So there's this, our breath is essential to our life. In so many ways, our breath is under threat right now. Our very, humanity, our very dignity, the very essence of who we are,
is under
and
attack.
Our ability to express ourselves is being muzzled and controlled and shamed and blamed into silence, into retreating into these fortresses of self-defense and really ugliness, right? So the breath was really under attack by a virus.
Yeah.
And by also ideologically, right? And George Floyd said, "I can't breathe."
Yeah.
Like the knee of oppression is on his face, pushing his face into the ground, and he can't breathe. And the symbolism of that, and that's why it's been such a rallying cry, because we all can identify with that. How horrible! It's one of the most panic-inducing things. I think that's one of the reasons why coronavirus is so scary, because the people who get it, like, they can't breathe, and that's got to be one of the most panic-inducing sensations, right? Like,
so true.
In fact, I don't know if everybody's version of a panic attack is like mine, but that's when I have
exactly
panic attacks.
I can't breathe.
I can't. That's where I really feel it. And
that's exactly
what I
it
mean?
is.
Like, it's literally that. It's such a powerful, central part of our humanity. And it's also what ties us all in common. Because whatever our ideological differences, whatever our racial differences, whatever our religious difference, whatever any of our differences are, we all breathe the same oxygen.
Same air.
And there's plenty of it for all of us. And the oxygen, that's why I love the idea of grace. The oxygen doesn't discriminate.
No.
It's the same oxygen that goes into the nostrils of a black man that goes into the nostrils of a white supremacist. It's a weird concept. And the oxygen doesn't discriminate.
No. I love that. And the beautiful of it is that in the definition of grace, it's undeserved. It's unmerited. It's nothing we had to do. Well,
that's what I mean. It makes no moral judgment.
Exactly.
So grace is the opposite of this knowledge of good and evil. Right? And grace doesn't. Right? Now, let's go back and unpack the good and bad thing. There is bad.
Of course there's bad.
And there are bad ideas.
Correct.
Right? So that's what I would say, for example, bringing that up, and I know it's a super touchy subject, and even as we talk, and you said before, I'm realizing, oh my gosh, do I really want to go here? Because it's a scare nowadays. Anything you say can and will be used against you, not in a court of law, in the court of public opinion.
That's it, on Twitter.
But I've often thought of this, like when, white supremacy is a very bad idea. I wouldn't even say it's an evil idea. I would go that far.
Yeah.
It's an evil idea because it's the very thing I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It's, for whatever reason, one group of people deciding that they're superior to another group. Whatever, fill in the blank with the details. It doesn't matter. That is a fundamentally evil idea. That is a bad thing. Yeah. Right? And the people who embrace that idea, they're not bad people, in my opinion. They're people with who have bought into, who have accepted, who have aligned themselves with a very bad idea. So the idea needs to be called out.
Correct.
Right? It is bad.
It is
so
bad.
When it comes to judging ideas or even physical realities, it's a bad idea to stick your hand in a blender. I mean, it's just a bad idea, right? So that kind of judging of good and evil we need to do right?
Otherwise we need.
But the value of a person to be judged.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that.
The person who is a really nasty racism is a very they've lost their humanity.
Yeah.
They're to be pitied.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because to be a racist at a level where you're, deliberately being inhuman to another human being, you're deliberately, raising yourself up above them at a very fundamental existential level, you have lost your breath.
Yeah. But here's the trap that I see and in what you're stating, which is really powerful, because what you've stated is the obvious in a sense of, the white supremacists. We can all kind of identify it and we can all say yes. And I think as a society, all of us can agree that that is a horrible idea and that person is to be pitied. However, what we're seeing, I think, and this is what I'm really interested in having a conversation, is that in the pursuit of progressive movement, we're also now utilizing the same ideas to try to further, in the name of social justice in some ways, to bring about equality. Because that's the problem right now in our culture, is this whole concept of shame and blame is silencing people.
Right.
So what's happening is, and I noticed this, and it hit me recently, and I thought, oh wow, this is so surreal in some sense, because the very people who are fighting against racism are now becoming the perpetual, or they're the in some ways they're using race as a means to divide and separate people, because they're relating to people according to their identities. This is what we would call it.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I see what you're saying. Mm-hmm. I think that's where we have to come to a much...
But do you see what I'm saying, is that the ditch is on both sides? I think often we always think of it. So
but you're still talking sides. That's where I want to challenge what you're saying. Yeah. You're still talking sides. You're right. I see what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. But I'm saying, like, until we all are working from the only side, side of life.
I agree. I'm just stating that
right?
when I'm speaking,
this problem isn't going anywhere.
Well, I'm just stating that often when we have this conversation, we see one side of the conversation. But I think the more subversive and the more challenging aspect of this concept, that the shame and blame that you've defined, is also on the other side, that both sides are in some ways practicing morality. But that's what
I'm saying. It's the tree that we're all eating.
So what I'm saying, we're all consuming it. I'm not just saying whether you're over here or over there, both are on the ditches, and both are essentially saying the same thing.
Yeah, I'm literally literally I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
but I'm literally concerned about how that could be heard.
Okay, because help me.
No, it's just
help me understand. What I'm stating is this: is that all I'm trying to, I think, state is that I think we need to have, in order to have civil discourse, we need to also address where people lie. And so sometimes I think what we do is we think, and this is, I think, what you're bringing up, I think is really important. It's that we always are having these conversations from the edges. Okay? So, and whatever belief systems and ideas that you have, whatever, you and I are having the same conversation. I'm just trying to make sure that we both understand that sometimes I think we can fall into this deception and idea that we're on the side of truth. I'm saying both sides that are screaming at each other from the edges are not on the side of the truth. I think there is this third way that you and I are having this conversation about. But I think often we're not aware. In order for me to come into a level of understanding, I need to also have an awareness of where I stand. You know what I mean? Often it's like, well, how do you address a problem? First of all, you got to know what the problem is, because if the person doesn't identify with the problem or doesn't even see the problem, it's like an alcoholic, you know?
So that's what I was getting at with the whole thing. I think the problem is the polarization.
That's correct. I agree.
The fact that we are, whatever the issue.
Correct.
There's a bazillion of them.
Of course.
Race is just one of them.
That's correct.
That's particularly ugly and particularly really obvious.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of this going on all sorts of levels.
Correct.
Even much more subtle than that. Is the first thing we need to do is stop
judging.
judging each other.
I agree.
Right? It's humility.
Yes.
Right? It's fine. It's saying, wait a minute. The reality is that we're all of equal. Our breath, your breath, my breath, the breath of any human person is of equal value to anybody else's breath.
Amen.
And this oxygen that we all breathe together tells that story. The oxygen itself tells a story. Otherwise, the oxygen, which is literally a life-giving force that surrounds us, right? We are immersed in it 24/7. We don't even think about it, right? In our sleep and whatever, we are constantly immersed in this oxygen. And that oxygen, which is literally giving us the very ability to everything else that we do, from getting out of bed to writing books, to starting businesses, to creating great works of art, to, whatever. Every human endeavor is supported by that oxygen.
I love it.
Right? And so it tells a story that it doesn't discriminate.
Common grace.
Right? It tells that story. So we have to be humble enough to recognize that that your breath, whether you're politically different than me, whether you're racially different than me, whether you're religiously different than me, is identical and of the exact 100% same value as my breath. Until we start there,
that's so true.
Right? We're not eating from that tree. Now I'm not looking at you through a lens of, are you better or worse than me?
No.
Like you have to divest. We have to divest ourselves of that whole perspective.
Okay, let me ask you. This is a big question because I'm into kind of solution focus. How do we get there? How do we get back?
Well, I think it's grace and humility, right? We all need to, recognize that we're like, I guess that's what you were saying, right? That we all. This is part of where the systemic thing, and this is something that changed my mind too, because I was like, I realize now how much, I played into this myself. I don't believe that I'm a racist person. I do not think of anybody as inferior to me on any level for any reason. That's just not in my heart. But I realize that I also, in the same tone though, I need to own that I'm part of this whole. We hear this word systemic a lot recently, right? And the reality is, I'm part of this system, and so I though I personally do not feel that I have a racist perspective, I'm part of the system that is racist, especially as a white male. I'm part of, so it's that humility of saying, this argument, like I used to think this, I'm embarrassed to say this because I hear this still sometimes and I cringe now when I hear it. It's like, well, I never owned a slave, like white people saying that. And I cringe when I hear that and I go, okay, that is a very unenlightened statement. It may be factually true, but you're not owning the collective mess that we all have a hand in, even if you personally didn't, contribute a lot to it. You know what I'm saying? I've come to that, so I feel very humbled by this whole thing because, like I say, I would not in any way consider myself a racist, and yet I feel like I'm complicit in racism as well. It's both and. It's both. It's what we were talking about. It's not an either or. Again, it's not good or evil. I'm not good or evil. I'm not this great, amazing person that I'm not racist, but I'm also not, I'm part of the problem. And I'm part of the solution.
Well, I think this is where you're heading, which I think this is this podcast is really about mindset more than anything. I was thinking about that as you and I are discussing this. And mindset is important in any area of our lives because it's our mindset dictates how we engage our relationships, work, any area of our lives. And I think because this conversation at the outset started talking about the genesis of things and how things start.
And the knowledge of good and evil, which is a mind thing. Knowledge is about the mind.
It's a mind thing. And so I think often, and I was thinking about this, is that when you look at Western civilization, whether it's, Canada, the US, these places. Often what you need to do is you need to go back historically to understand. I was on a conversation yesterday with this lovely lady, and she was talking about the plight of the indigenous in Canada, and she was giving me a history lesson, how the land was taken from them and these treaties, and it's horrible when you look at it in the Indian Act and the impact it's had. And in order to reverse something like that, the first step in anything is recognition. And recognition is not just like, well, yeah, but really sitting down and understanding. And I think this is what you're doing is that you finally came to an awareness of and say, wow, like a lot of evil has been done in the name of whatever. And for you to, connect with it at an emotional level, that's powerful. That's so important, because now, whether it's Joe or any other person, you feel heard.
Not only that, like I really feel now more than ever when I think the other thing that comes with this sort of this mindset of moralizing mindset, and it's huge, for those of us who come out of a religious background, is this sort of need to correct somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's part of this self-righteousness. So now that's what I'm saying. Like I would have said like, well, I'm not racist. I would have defended myself. And now I'm going like, no, I don't, like, that's not the point. Like I need to hear the pain of somebody who's been on the other end of something that I have not experienced, and just hear it and empathize with it and feel it with them and be in solidarity with them. I haven't been able to, I can't always prevent it or be part of even the solution, but just to sit with the reality of it and consider myself part of it in both, like that common humanity,
exactly.
that oxygen thing, right? To say,
but
like that's going to the DNA of what makes us equal.
Well,
right?
human.
So I don't need to correct you. I don't need to tell you to get over it. I don't need to, all that garbage. In fact, if I do that, then I'm doing the very thing I'm talking about. Then I'm being a judge over you. I'm deciding what you need to do, how you need to do. I'm trying to control, and even my intentions are good. I think the worst kind is when it's easy, I've always said this, like, you don't have to tell your kids, don't go with the if some monster looking guy who's drooling and, big and ugly, hey kid, you want to come in my car? Like every child will automatically run away from that guy. It's the nice looking guy that looks like he's a businessman or whatever. It's so the most difficult evil or racism or any of this to identify in ourselves is the one that comes out of good intentions. Because the obvious thing, if you're going around, beating people up or calling people names or whatever, well, that's pretty obvious. But it's the stuff where I have a good intention, and yet in my good intention, I still overstep my boundary into your humanity. I still impose, my muzzle on your breath. Meaning well, but I'm still doing damage.
Yeah.
So this idea of like just owning our space and saying I don't need to correct or fix. I mean, we can all fix. We're all part of the problem. We're all part of the solution. So that's another conversation. Of course, we need to fix this. We all need to fix this. No question about it. But I mean, in that sense of that immediacy, before that, I think that's what you're saying.
Well, yeah, because at the end of the day, we all want to be heard and validated. And so what you're stating, which is really powerful, is that if I come to you and I'm in somehow, letting you into my pain, the last thing I need you to do is to be threatened and afraid and put a wall, because what you're saying essentially is like, listen, don't blame me, because that's the conversation that I think we're having, is that the recipient immediately. So when somebody enters a conversation that they may not be necessarily comfortable in, or it's a conversation that they never thought was necessary, the first thing I think as humans we do is we get defensive.
Yeah.
And we go into corrective measures.
But that's still part of that tree, because we think loss gain. That's another version of good and evil, right? If you gain, I lose. If I gain, you lose. So then we're defensive, right? But again, grace says, And humility says, no, there's enough oxygen for all of us.
That's it.
There's enough room for you to be not where you are and who you are, and it doesn't take away from me, right?
Yes.
Like that's the fundamental seed here.
But that's a massive mindset shift that we need to make, because the culture, this whole concept and idea that you've brought up, which is so powerful, because I think you're giving people, understanding and insight to how things evolve. But where we are right now in our world, we operate from a scarcity mindset. It's not, so when you describe grace and when you describe oxygen, one of the things, the first thing I think is abundance. There's more than enough of it. So if there's more than enough, then there's enough for you and there's enough for me, there's enough for everybody. But I think when we enter into this type of mindset, which is the shame, blame, this whole idea of judgment, we get into scarcity mindset.
Absolutely. And then we're fighting for survival. That's what I'm saying. It's triggering this survival instinct.
We're the primal nature,
And when we're under threat, it's to the degree, and that's why there's uprisings. That's why it's because power is being hoarded, power is being misused. Now we can transition to the power part, right? And so when we're made, our breath, our essential dignity as a person is also about agency, right? About having some degree of having dignity, right? Of having agency, as in like, I'm my own person. I'm separate from you, right?
Yeah.
I make my own decisions. I have my own taste. So there's a paradox there again. In some fundamental ways, we're all the same.
Yeah.
That's a truth. In another way, we're all unique. We're all individual,
different.
very specific,
Yeah.
right? And so holding those two things, again, holding space for you to be you doesn't take away from me to be me.
That's it.
Right? And so it's a whole other place. So now, but if we're in this judgment mode, if we're in this knowledge of good and evil, where then I have to protect, I have to protect what I have, because you're going to take it from me. I mean, that's every war. I mean, self-righteousness is at the root of all of this, because every war is like, and all this colonization that's happened here, where all these, these people have had their land taken and their freedom taken. I mean, that's what a lot of this is about historically, right? Is one group of people, feeling like, well, I got to take I got to take their stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's not going to be enough for me. Right. And using that as a rationale for destroying other people. Again, it's self-righteousness.
Yeah.
Who are you to destroy another person? Where do you, and why? Because you feel like you are better than them. Your interests are more important than them. So, okay, I'll take their food because I have to feed my family.
Yeah.
Right?
You justify it.
And so all this sort of underlying idea, again, of judging, of saying, oh, your life in one way is less valuable than mine. My interests are more important than your interests. That's part of this tree. That's part of that mentality. And you're right. It's a really deep-seated mindset. It's really at the DNA of our thinking. Because until we unlock that lens and switch it out for a lens of grace that says, no, you're right. And whatever you want to call it, God, the universe, whatever, trusting that there's enough for all of us, right? There's enough for everybody to be 100% who they are without encroaching on your uniqueness and your special, right?
Yeah. And this is the challenge of it all. And it's these boundaries and barriers and, even the world as we know it, we've come out and made maps, and it's interesting when you think of Africa, for example, when the British came along and colonized it and then finally left it. They kind of arbitrarily started to, draw
carve
a line.
It up.
Yeah, they just carved it up. Even my country at one point, it was just in 1952, they just annexed it to Ethiopia. It's just like, because this is the what power does to humans is that we divide, and I think
we divide into the category of fundamentally good and evil. Again, we may not use those words.
No, we don't.
It's like one of my favorite analogies for this is like computing, like the computers, right? Like at the very DNA of computing is this simple little binary on off,
Yeah.
1 0. That's it, right?
Yeah.
Good, evil, right? That's the same, that binary, right?
Interesting.
It seems really simplistic. But now the complexity, our computers are super sophisticated, and there's a ton of like depth and detail. Like, I mean, now they're phones, we can make calls on it, we can music. I mean, like the complexity of computing is mind-boggling. But the DNA of it is 1 0. And there's the same issue I'm talking about, this good and evil. So we might not use those words, but the DNA of all this stuff, of all these social issues, is that simple.
Yeah.
Right?
So
we may use different words, different idea, but it's this dividing, it's this categorizing, it's this,
pitting,
separating and creating, as opposed to the wide openness of life.
Yes.
Life, like even when you think about life, right? When you say not just life as in being, physically alive, but when we say that's life, right? When you feel like elation, when you're you're doing whatever you love to do, and you're riding on a speedboat and the wind is blowing through your hair, or whatever you love, and you go, I feel so alive. That's life, right?
Yeah.
It's always a sense of vastness and freedom. It's always associated with some sort of like, or I'm on vacation, I don't have to work for the next 2 weeks, I can put my feet up and do whatever I want. That's life, right? Life is about sort of this sort of wide open possibilities. No, you don't, right?
Yeah.
And drudgery is about the boundary.
Yes.
Oh, I have to go back to work on Monday.
Yes.
Oh, I'm tired. There's a limitation. It's about a limit.
Yeah.
So everything that's sort of, right? So
Yeah.
as soon as you take the limits off, you feel invigorated. You feel life, right? So that's the opposite tree, the tree of life. And we're always trying to put these.
But that's it's funny because I've just watched yesterday my kids and I and my wife, we went and watched Dr. Dolittle, which is really powerful. And then a couple of weeks ago we'd watched Aladdin, which by the way is a musical to my surprise. So there's Will Smith singing. I was like, Will singing.
I'm more concerned about the fact that he's blue.
I was more concerned that he was singing. It's interesting what we see. But the point is, Aladdin's a great film because it's all about power.
Ah.
Because I didn't even know, and I'd watched it, but I guess I'd never read the book. So I hope there was a book. If not, I'm sure there was a book.
Started with a book.
But the point is, the movie is about this great kingdom. There's a sultan and his daughter, who's a princess, and then there's the second in command. And this guy, he's come from the bottom up. He's worked his way all the way second in command. He's got the ear of the king. He's got everything he could ever want, but he's not satisfied until he becomes the sultan. So this is an obsession. This is an obsession with power.
Yes.
And what I love about the ending, and if I, ruin it for somebody, well, tough luck. Spoiler alert.
Aladdin.
Yeah, Aladdin. I don't know how many people are going to watch that. But at the end, this guy, he's consolidated power, and he's taken over the genie, and he can make his wishes, and he's made his second wish, which is to become. He's got the ability to become a sorcerer, so he can do whatever he wants to, but he's still not as powerful. So but the genie, who's Will Smith, he's all powerful. He has all the power, but he seeks one thing: freedom.
Oh, okay.
He's confined by his power.
Right.
And he can live as long as he wants. He can do whatever, but he's confined. And so his wish at the outset of the movie is that somehow that he get out of that little teapot that he's in, because he finds it confining. And so at the end of the movie, this guy is about to, take over the kingdom, and he's about to become the sultan and all that stuff. But then they get him on this one thing. They offer him, isn't your wish to be all-knowing, all-powerful? But there's one person who's more greater, more powerful than you. Who? The genie. He can't have it. He's like obsessed. And so he falls for it. So he makes this third wish that he would be like the genie, and they switch places. And he's trapped. And I was thinking about that, the trap of power.
Yeah.
That is what the whole story of the Garden of Eden is. The trap of power is that in the end, we think, and this is the trick of it all, the snake offering them power ultimately to be like, to be God. This guy's holding off on you. And so they're like, okay, he told us we can't eat off that. Well, he's holding off. So then the very thing that they thought was going to give them life kills them.
Yeah, it imprisons them. Exactly right. Right. And and taking on this responsibility of judging.
Yes.
Who is good and who is evil.
Yes.
And either doing it, and we see, and it goes in three directions, actually. It goes toward each other. So we've been talking a lot about that.
Yeah.
So that's that to me, that's the lesson of that story. That's a human story. It's for all people. You don't have to be religious again. You don't have to believe in God. That story is very powerful because just like Aladdin, even if you think it's just a made up story, it has a very powerful truth in it, which says that we were never intended, like you said, we cannot handle the ability or the responsibility of judging each other or ourselves or even God, if you believe in God, as being good or evil. The minute we do that, we get ourselves into a prison. We cause ourselves individually and collectively as a human race every kind of nightmarish pain that everything, again, because all the war is everything, right? And so if we would get out of that business, that's the story of that tree. So you're saying, well, what's the answer?
Solution.
I mean, there's all, and I don't want to simplify.
No,
too much
of course not,
because it sounds so simplistic. But just in this spirit of what we were talking about, just looking at some very foundational issues. Because if you have that foundational mindset, then it's like the computer thing. If you understand 1 and 0. Yeah, 1 and 0 by itself is puny. It's relevant. It does nothing. But 1 and 0 worked into this level of complexity where I can have Photoshop and Zoom and I can talk to anybody around the world instantly, like all this crazy technology that we love and rely on. If you understand 1 and 0, you can unravel it's super complex. It's not that simple, but it is that simple. That's a great paradigm. It is that simple. So I'm not trying to minimize, say, there's this really simple little answer for all of our problems, but yet kind of there is. If we would just get that DNA in us, that switch of mindset to say, so one of the things is this idea. So everything, like that's one of the reasons why people see the Bible and God through that lens. And why a lot of people reject it. I do too on that basis, but I don't see it that way. So it's like you start seeing it through the other lens. So one of the ways is like this idea of you reap what you sow. I've always heard that as a threat. Well, you're going to reap what you sow. You make bad decisions or you do something bad. Some people call it karma, payback. Payback's a bitch. God's wrath, whatever language you want. The idea. But looking at it through the grace lens, through the other lens, is saying no. That's a very exciting concept because what it's saying is that whatever. If I want, it's just a farming thing. It's very basic. If I want oranges, if I want to eat an orange, then I plant an orange tree and I'll reap an orange. If I want carrots, then I can sow a carrot seed and I'll get a carrot. But not right away, but eventually, right? So this is something I've learned even with as a dad with my kids. Now that they're older, they're not little children anymore. Grace says, and I'm going to sow into you what I want to see in you. So much of the parenting that I've grown up, that sort of that top-down, sort of authoritarian parenting, that's parenting out of good and evil, out of fear. We got to keep these kids. We got to, and then take away their phone if they're misbehaving, and all this sort of judgment-based, punitive-based punishment reward kind of parenting, which is it's just a whole other fruit of this tree, of that mindset, right? What about this? So, if I want trustworthy kids, I don't do that by sowing into them distrust, by sowing into them limitations and punishment. And if you break the rule, then you're going to be grounded. I sow into them trust. I've learned this, and it's hard because at first you think it's very vulnerable. So if I want somebody to be trustworthy, then I sow trust in them.
Mm-hmm.
Before, usually we hold it the other way around. It's
You got to earn it.
You show me trust first, and then I'll trust you.
Yeah.
Right. And that's that mindset of division of like, no, you know, somebody's got to go first.
Yeah.
So then when we talk about forgiveness, we talk about vulnerability, which I love. I think I mentioned this last time. If not, I love one of the definitions that Brene Brown talks about vulnerability, which is putting yourself in situations where you can't control the outcome. That's beautiful. Vulnerability isn't just about, you know, me telling you all my stuff. It's about me entrusting myself not to control you, so that I can somehow try and manipulate an outcome. So I don't know if I might sow trust in you, and it might just die on the vine, and you might turn around and but we're never going to know until. So part of the unraveling of this mindset is we begin to now say, okay, into this culture right now that's so polarized, so whatever, to start rather than sowing distrust, rather than sowing hatred, rather than sowing,
division. Yeah.
We begin sowing. I'm going to trust you. I'm going to make myself vulnerable to you. I'm going to allow you to maybe even have power over me at some level. Like that's unheard of.
That's unheard of. Yeah.
Right. Like sometimes, like I do that. Like I'm not saying this again in any way at all. It's just something that I've been experiencing, like in relationships. Like sometimes, and it's in the Bible. Like sometimes I allow myself to be wronged by somebody because I have a higher goal.
Yeah.
Right. Because I have a higher goal for that relationship, and I could take up my case and get my reward or punishment. But I'll allow that person to hurt me. And I'm not talking about letting yourself be abused. And I mean, it's a whole other, but this idea of like the walls have to come down some way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And how do they begin to come down? We begin by trusting each other.
Yeah.
And some people won't rise up to that. Some people will abuse that trust.
Yeah.
There's no question.
Yeah. This is the nature of it.
But it's the risk that must be taken.
Yeah.
If we're going to ever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Ever begin to fix the deep divisions that are entrenching people politically, religiously, racially,
Yeah, and I think this is where, because often people blame the medium. So whether it's TV, social media, rock music, on and on it goes. And I thought about this for a long time. I mean, the people who created social media, none of them, like Mark Zuckerberg wasn't hanging out at Harvard University and thinking about, taking over the world. That wasn't his end. He just wanted to create this really cool social app that, matches people. Facebook. That's like, if you saw the movie, you see the genesis of it all. But then often what happens is that as things evolve and get bigger, and I don't think he himself can really truly control this machine now, because it's Facebook, first of all, is publicly traded, so he's got all kinds of shareholders and all sorts of. So he's got a lot of different pressures that he's dealing with, and I'm sure he's trying to figure out. The position of a social media CEO is kind of godlike in some sense, because you decide what content gets shown. You decide the way the algorithm is designed. So a lot of your biases and whatever belief systems that you hold is literally baked into the system, whether you like it or not, whether consciously or unconsciously. Yeah. But the challenge now, and this is where I was thinking about this today, and I'm like, the traditional typical thing is like people, for example, Netflix, they put on that, I think I can't remember, it's about, it's a documentary or movie, whatever, but there's a lot of outrage with it because it's, in some ways, even though it's not intentionally, purposely putting kids in sense of trafficking them or in a sexual light, but they've done it, and I don't agree with it at all. But the question is this then: do I just cancel Netflix? And I think this is the concept I've just been thinking about, is what if the conversation is, and this is the thing that you're getting into, which is really powerful, is what if we can bake in this belief system and idea into these systems?
Well, it reminds me of something your last guest last week said, Kevin Bourne.
Yeah.
That I loved, and I Facebooked.
Yeah.
He was talking about systemic change, because we're hearing that word over and over.
Yeah.
And where he said, if you want to see systemic change, don't just sit outside the system complaining about the system, get into the system.
Yes.
Which is what I love. That was such a strong takeaway. And I go, exactly. And what I'm talking about in terms of the vulnerability, we got to go back to one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook is not the place for you to be vulnerable.
No.
You will be
eaten
destroyed. I'm talking face to face, real people, the people in your life. Begin there, right? We have to practice. All these things are seeds, right? Like you have to begin in your own garden. To eat first to plant the fruit and then eat it, and then eat a different fruit than the other one, right?
Yeah.
We're not going to solve the world's problems until we begin. It's like the ones and zeros, right? Like less than 50 years ago, I think, like we didn't have the kind of computing power we have now.
No.
That movie points that out. It's exponentially grown faster than any technology ever in the history of like they said, cars in 100 years have become twice as fast. Computers in only 50 years have become millions of times. I think he even might have said billions of times faster than they were. Yeah. Right. So when this binary idea of ones and zeros started, it was cards, with little holes in them. Remember right? And here we are only, 50 or so years later, and now we're holding in our hands, computing power that is just mind-boggling. But it all started with somebody with little punch cards making a little hole for zero and not for something like that.
Yeah,
I mean, I loosely, I don't know the details, but you know what I'm saying?
I gotcha.
So if we want to change the world, be in the system, but the system starts with just in your life, in the one-on-one relationships, in your world, in your family, in the way you interact with your kids, with your spouse, with your coworkers. And if we all begin to do that, then that will become the new system.
I agree.
Right? So it's not just about...
Yeah, it's not top level.
And there is that too.
Yeah,
I'm not saying
I agree.
That.
It's both.
Right?
Yeah.
But I'm saying that's accessible to me and you now, today.
And I think...
So I need to have that mindset. And we were talking about this last week.
Yeah.
Sometimes that hurts. There's a price for this. Like, sometimes, I'm so... believe in this concept of grace that I'm so trying to and I don't do it perfectly, but it's not a goal.
No.
And I don't judge myself. It's not a goal where if I get it right, because then I'm back in the other mindset, right? That there's a reward. It's just a thing that I want to that I value, so I want to practice, right?
Yeah.
And so sometimes taking a grace stance in a relationship really hurts. And sometimes I get wronged, but I still think it's worth it.
I believe it.
Because I believe so much that the mindset of grace, the mindset of not judging, the mindset of not trying to manipulate others to do what I want them to do, even if I have the good intentions for them, the me not crossing that boundary, me not infringing on somebody else's breath, I value that so much.
So good.
That I will pay a high price for it if I need to. And I don't always get it right.
No,
it's not a goal. It's not a thing to attain. It's just a mindset to allow to sort of become a DNA of just how I see, how I think. You know what I mean?
And I think
that's part of the answer. So seeing that. Encouraging that more people to let down their judgment. Yeah.
And it's scary because, these emotions, they fuel us. And so if we've been hurt, and you see this often with athletes or even musicians, artists of different things, they're motivated by their pain. And when you take the pain away, they have nothing left. And so they have to, in many ways, literally relearn how to find new motivation.
That's the story of my life. I mean, yeah.
So we have to have grace for individuals to go through the process of it's a transformational journey. I was thinking about this recently, and I was just talking to somebody this morning, and it was actually in regards to Jesus, and when he's in that I think it's in, for anybody who's interested, in Matthew 4, and it's he's ushered into the season of wilderness for 40 days. He has no food. He's and he's tested, and I was thinking about people often talk about the hero's journey, and in any movie that we watch, and this is why we read the books and we watch the movies, because ultimately it's a journey we all take. It's a hero's journey, and so we identify with it, and so that's why we go to the movies and we love superheroes and so forth, so on. And I think in some sense, for all of us, we also have this journey that we all have to go through, but we have to endure a bunch of different types, and it's all of us are different in that sense, in the sense that the different tests that we have to go through, and challenges because of experiences that we've gone through. So I was just thinking about Jesus in the sense of he's got this big calling, obviously, and he's going to be into ministry, public ministry, because prior to that he hasn't done anything, but he has to go through this 40 years of having to deprive himself. He's deprived of the comforts of life. Like he loses a whole lot of his rights. He can't eat. So the first one is the bread, and then he's tested with power. What I think the ultimate one is actually
right. The last, yes.
The last one is the test of power. And I was thinking about that. These are all the things that he had already inherited, that they were already resident in him, but they were being offered to him prematurely. So he had to take it either by force, or he had to do it out of, like you're discussing this idea of like people taking stuff, through coercion or through different types of means, trying to outsmart somebody, whatever it is. But I thought to myself, isn't that interesting that he's tested with the very thing that he's designed to do?
Right.
And I think often the reason why we get into these adversarial relationships and we get this binary thinking is because we don't think what's inside of us is enough. And so we go outside of ourselves and try to extract it from this person, that person.
Well, that's it. And I think that's, to me, I just as you're talking, as crystallizing, and again, I want to be so careful because I'm the kind of person where I'm so, because of shame, because I've grown up so much with shame, I'm so afraid of being misunderstood. Like, that's one of my biggest fears. There used to be a song in the 60s, "Oh Lord, please don't let me be misunderstood." Like, that's one of the worst things, right? So even as I say all this, I'm like, oh gosh, am I sounding like I'm just saying, like, for me, as I watch this whole nightmare that's all around us right now, with all this crazy stuff, I go, oh, my contribution right now. And it doesn't mean, it's not instead of me, being involved or going and doing stuff or whatever. I'm not, this is not, again, it's not an either or, good or evil, black or white, this or that. It's both. But my personal, when I look at this huge societal thing we have with the virus and the government and all this, and I'm overwhelmed. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, it feels like the world is just getting nastier and just falling apart, and people are like, and I kind of reach, I go, what can I do? Well, there's lots of stuff I can do, but I feel like right now, my personal, like if I bring it down to just my micro, my inside, just that inner place, my very breath, right? What can I do? I can begin to divest myself in every possible way of the need to judge or control another human being. I don't know what that's gonna. I don't know if that's gonna do anything. I'm one little whatever. But I have a sense that if I can get there, and it may never be fully realized, but if that's one of my contributions.
Amazing.
I just see so much control and manipulation. And we talk about it on a large level, systemically. We talk about it interpersonally. Like I've been on the other side of it for so long in relationships. I just want to get out of that whole business. I want to get out of that whole business of eating from the tree of the good knowledge of good and evil, deciding even the idea of, do I agree with somebody, as if who cares? They are who you are, just letting people be fully without me encroaching on them somehow, even with withholding affection, with, criticizing them, like, I don't know. That's a very deep thing for me right now. And I feel like somehow, in some bizarre way, that's part of my contribution to all of this, to helping to begin to, right this terrible state that we're in of, deep-seated,
division
and fighting, and, even as I say it, I'm almost like, here we are in the middle. We kind of got deep down this.
Yeah, exactly.
This path, and I'm almost like now, I've just switched from an intellectual.
Yeah, it's real now.
Discussion to this deeply intuitive, emotional space that I've been finding myself in, and I'm realizing, oh gosh, I'm doing this now in front of a microphone, in front of who knows, and I'm like, part of me is like freaking out right now. It's like, but I've kind of I've tapped into this thing now. It's not emotion, but this force that's beyond just ideas and talk and stuff, and that's I don't know if I'm expressing it right.
You're expressing it beautifully.
I
because
really don't know, but
as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking of how, and this is the programming side of it, in the sense that the natural disposition these days tends to be to fall into judgments, and we do this with our kids, our wives, and people. We're driving. We're literally programmed to think this way. So when you have a discussion like this, and you're talking about a completely different way of living and thinking and seeing, it does sound incredibly arduous and challenging and difficult.
It just sounds elusive. I guess that's part of what I'm listening to myself. I'm going, man, I'm being like so vague right now. Like even the currencies, like the currency of approval, these social currencies, like approval or disapproval. Man, we wield that. You know what I mean? And I can manipulate you just by whether I approve of you or I don't approve of you. And never consciously even.
No.
Just, you know what I mean? And I'm like, who am I to approve or disapprove of you or anybody who's standing in front of me? I'm talking to you because you're in front of me.
Yeah.
Who am I? Like to, and again, being raised in a religious context, that's all we do. We look at another person and we feel, we look at their sin or their, the way that they need to improve, and we couch it all in like we love them, so we're telling, wait a minute, who, that's that tree, like I'm being your judge. I'm deciding the agenda for you. I'm deciding whether you're worthy of my approval. That is arrogant. That's arrogant, right? I'm like, I want to like
nothing to do with it.
Have nothing to do with that anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but it does take, and I'm learning this just on a, it's great that we're having this conversation on a micro level, because I think sometimes we can have.
That's the only place I can begin to even grasp
it.
Take
a hold of it, but
again, it's that DNA, that little bit, maybe that little cell eventually will.
But isn't that how things spill out, though? And the reality is the societal ills that we're having right now, they had to germinate and start somewhere, and generally they start in these one-on-one relationships. I mean, I think one of the wars that we fought, I don't know, it was the first or second one, was basically some guy getting killed, and then it starts this whole process of people going, what, they killed King whatever or Prince whatever. I can't remember the details. It escalates.
Right. And so it's the de-escalation goes in the other direction. It
Correct.
starts with a small thing and then
so it does have to start at that level.
Yeah.
And I think this is where, and this is challenging our culture today, because part of the whole virtue singling is because of social media, we're all making these big, massive statements of our positions and ideas, and this is where we get the like dislike, and so we're getting the approval.
Well, that's even that in its core. I mean, and it's innocent.
Yeah.
It's innocent to say, "Oh, I like your picture." That's fine.
No,
We're not talking on that level. But fundamentally, that's still that whole mindset of we judge, I approve, I disapprove of you. This whole currency, and it's shame and blame and this whole currency and this idea. That's my favorite definition of grace, is that, and it's God, when in the context of of that version of grace, God not counting our sins or weaknesses or flaws, whatever word you want to call it, against us. It's not, and it's not, because I can hear the other side, because I've grown up with that. Well, you got to call people into account, and you got to, you got to tough love, and you got to tell people, yeah, there's a place for that, but not where I'm talking at a DNA level. No, that's the grace disposition, that I don't count your weaknesses against you, what I perceive to be your weakness. I don't count your flaws against you. I don't count what you've done to hurt me against you. That's my favorite definition of grace, of love. It's not that you haven't. It's not that you don't have, but I don't count them against you as a person. I don't hold those against you. That's that judgment lens, that self-righteous, that I don't hold, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
I don't
and
hold
that
it
changes because then my disposition towards you changes, because I'm not approaching you from a place of guilt or shame. Because if I know that you're not holding my wrong against me, I have this sense of like, wow, okay, the worst is the thing that I was thinking is going to happen is not happening. Oh, and then I start to open up, and I begin to breathe.
Right. Again, that expansion.
And that's the problem in relationships. I mean, that is marriage by definition often. When a person is in a marriage and they get that judgment and that silent treatment, whatever it might be, they feel like they are this small and they literally cannot breathe. But if they experience a whole different disposition, it's not that you're not recognizing the wrong. You're just not holding it against them. You're not reminding them of them.
Punishing them.
That's cool.
I'm going to punish you, but the classic one in marriage, you go sleep on the couch for 3 days or whatever. Like there's this punishment. We treat each other like bad parents. Where like we punish you socially. We gossip, or we slander, or we all of it. Again, it's all part of that same thing, right?
Correct.
Like we're judging and executing some kind of social punishment and wielding a kind of power over each other. Those are very powerful stuff. The need for approval. That's what social media is all about. The likes and dislikes, and a whole generation is being now like psychologically programmed to have to meet a standard that's literally doesn't exist, like the filters and whatever. And then one of the statistics in that's horribly sad in that movie that I told you about, they said that from 2000 and I think it was 8 or 11, I can't remember, but anyways, the instance of mental health and suicide among particularly girls, preteen and teen girls, went up. Like they showed the curve, right? It had been fairly stable for all this time, and then there's a direct correlation with social media.
Wow.
It has gone up for preteen girls. I say 168%. I don't remember the exact numbers. You look at the movie. It's called what's the movie?
Social Dilemma.
The Social Dilemma on Netflix, and the other one was instances of mental health, depression, anxiety. And it's like there's a direct data-driven correlation between social media and massive mental health and suicide. And so again, it's like this whole thing, we're turning the judgment on ourselves. We're not only judging each other, but then we're egging each other on to judge ourselves as being unworthy, or as it's such an important thing that we need to stop. That's the beginning. I love it. Like stop
judging. Yeah. And this is said without judgment. And I think, the success of this conversation is not that we came up with a solution, is that we brought into awareness into...
I don't think it's a solution directly.
No.
It's an underlying disposition that then will make a solution possible, or a whole set of solutions. Because like I said, I don't want to minimize. I go back to my computer analogy. It's just understanding the ones and zeros so that we can build these sophisticated solutions, which are complicated and complex and big and and it takes a lot of but it's about a disposition. It's not right. Anyways.
No, and disposition is everything. And
it's a starting point. Again, it's the mouth of the river, it's the genesis, just kind of wrapping up the whole analogy here. And if you get in at that, it's like they talk about in business. If you get in at the ground level when it's small, and then you ride it through to its growth, later when it's big and grow, you were there, and it's too late later. It's these small beginnings, right?
Correct.
It's not despising the small things. I love it. That's a whole other.
Yeah, that's a whole other podcast.
That could start off a whole other really interesting conversation. But
no, this has been incredibly fascinating. I think the lesson here is the fact that ultimately, power by design is something that not one person can handle. It's not even something that I think we should be pursuing. And because the
power over each other.
Correct. That's what I mean.
Right.
We cannot, because
which is the very definition of war.
Yeah.
When it's scaled up.
And
right?
this is the thing. To end this conversation, the threat is never external, and we always think the threat is outside of ourselves. But the threat and the solution often is inside of us. And I think this conversation, that's why it feels a little bit elusive, because these are not necessarily things that you can easily grab onto, because they're not necessarily like 7 steps to whatever. This is a philosophy and way of living. We're talking mindset. We're talking at a really subatomic level. I don't know if you can say that, but so that's why they're the most powerful.
But if you can catch a vision for that, that's what I mean, right? Yes. It's a disposition. It's not even a task. It's not something put on your to-do list. It's not an achievement, although it can sound like those things. It's a disposition. If I can consciously change the way I see other people,
it'll change everything.
Like, there's so much that will grow out of that one thing, and it's right.
Yeah,
and I literally, that to me, I mean, that's it. Like, if we could do that, if we can see each other not through the lens of judgment and superiority or threat, but if we can begin to see each other through the lens of, like you said, abundance, and like even like a very quick example, even in my marriage, right? My wife and I are so different, and yet and early in our marriage, that was like, that divided us. That made each of us paranoid. The other one, oh no, like, she's so different, and I like this, and she likes that, and how are we ever, and it was a source of contention. It was a source of separation. And now we've realized, with that same mindset, it's like, oh, this is great, because you're so different than me, and that means that together we cover more ground. So your differentness now isn't a threat to me. It's an asset. So you see what I'm saying? So think about that even at the scale of racially or politically or whatever, saying, hey, like, the fact that you think different, or you are different, or you believe different, it's not a threat to me. It actually enriches me.
Exactly.
Right? It actually enriches me. So together with your seeing the world this way and my seeing the world this way, even though they're different, man, we cover more ground. Together we add, we don't subtract from each other. We add to each other. Whoops, sorry. Right? Yeah. And that's that mindset again, right? It's the seed, right? Anyways.
I love it. This is incredible. Again, Bill, I'm so overjoyed that you and I can have these conversations, and people can eavesdrop, and hopefully people really been just, I think, challenged to just see the world a little differently than the way they've been viewing it. And hopefully you guys can even, give us some feedback, what you think about this conversation, because again, this is just two of us having this conversation, and our intent is to have a conversation that is, far-reaching. And so just thank you so much for taking the time. And Bill, you're awesome. You're brilliant. And thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
See you on the other side, guys. I'm horrible at this. I got to learn how to throw it. You know, they do that in TV